Welcome to Google I/O Day 2, and thanks for joining us first thing in the morning. It's happy to see people out here. As you can see, we're talking about the drive login velocity across your platforms with the Google Plus sign-in product. My name is Joel Van Bergen, and this is Randy Merrill. And yeah, so we're both software engineers on the platform team. We actually work on parts of these products. And so let's get started. OK, so today we're here to talk about Google Plus sign-in. And there's three things we'd like you guys to remember kind of by the end of this talk. One is that the Google Plus sign-in product is easy to implement across your Android, iOS, and web devices. And we'll show you a bit of the code in that for a moment, where Randy's going to actually talk about the actual implementation, and we can go through some sample code with you guys. The second is the Google Plus sign-in product is a truly cross-platform product. And we're really committed to helping you drive conversions from one platform to another. As well, we really want to help you create a seamless experience for your users across all of their devices, whatever they might be using. And finally, Google Plus sign-in will help you help your users bring their Google identity with them to your app. And we found this really reduces friction on the sign-in process and helps users get involved with your app right away. As well, we've had some of our partners find that Google signed-in users are some of their most engaged users in some of the studies that they've done. So I'm going to start by showing an example of how the product looks today. So here we have the Fancy, which is an app where you can browse and view different things and kind of bookmark, or as I call it, fancy things that you like, and then later purchase those items. So here, if the user clicks the Sign In with Google button, they get taken to an authorization screen where it lets the user know what the Fancy wants to see. So it's showing them that they want to know the basic profile and that they want to make the review activities available to Google from the Fancy. And at this point, if the user had multiple accounts on their device, they would get the option to select one of their accounts. I'm sure many of you guys on Android have already seen this. Select one of their accounts to use with the Fancy before proceeding to the authorization screen. Once the user clicks Sign In, the Fancy then shows a username and a profile picture for that user. And this is very important. As if you've attended many of the design talks or the user experience talks here, our team will tell you that it's great for showing consistency to the user so they know what's happened. They have feedback on what's actually going on. And then they also know you get reminded of which account they chose. Especially if they're coming back to your app at a later date, they know which of their Google accounts they're actually using. OK, so let's say they've been using your app for a while, and then they make their way to your website. The Google Plus sign-in product gives a way to do silent authentication. So this means that if the user's already signed in on one of the other devices, one of the other platforms, when they come to the new platform, in this case web, they'll automatically be signed in without having to see another authorization screen, without having to type another password. And this works as long as they're already signed in on that device. So in this case web, if they're signed into any Google product on their web browser or signed into their Chrome browser, they'll automatically be signed in. And then here we have, as part of the sign-in process, we show the username and the profile picture again so the user knows what's actually happened. All right, so let's take a look at a new scenario. Let's say that a user has come to your website first. After they've clicked Sign In on that authorization screen that we showed you previously, they're going to get shown an option to install your Android app directly from web through to their Android phone. So they're on their web browser, they've clicked Sign In, they get this pop-up where they can pick any number of their Android devices, whether it's their tablet or their smartphone. And as soon as they click the Install button, it's automatically going to start installing on their phone. So this means they don't have to take it out of their pocket, they don't have to set a reminder later, they don't end up forgetting to install your Android app. It automatically happens. And then as soon as it finishes happening, say a few minutes, depending on their internet connection and how big the app is, they get a notification showing them what's already happened and giving them a chance to try your app out for the first time. So it kind of just reminds them, gives them a way to give it a first try. OK, so now that we know what it looks like, let's take a look at some of the case studies of what our partners have found with using Google Plus Sign-In. Hotel Tonight is a hotel booking service. They found that they had a 100% increase in their Android signed-in user base after implementing Google Plus Sign-In. As well, they found that Google Plus signed-in users were 50% more likely to purchase than users signed in with other products. And finally, they found that Android user base grew 50% after implementing Google Plus sign-in. So they had a 50% growth in just Android overall users after implementing the sign-in product, which we were very happy with those findings. Deezer is a music streaming service. Deezer found that 33% of the Google users who came to their website chose to install their Android app immediately via that over-the-air install that I just showed you. They found that Google users were 2 times more likely to purchase upgraded accounts. And they found that Google users listened to 15% more music than those using other sign-in methods. OK, so now we're going to get into some of the code of how you can actually implement this. And I'll let Randy talk to you about that.
Thanks. So we've seen the experience that people get when they actually use the product. Huh?
Closer.
Closer. OK. I'll talk louder. OK, so now we're going to get into the code. But before we do, we're actually going to go to the Google Developer Console. So you'll need to go to the Developer Console first before you start programming. You'll register your app and create a project for it, and you'll get back a client ID. That client ID is what you'll use in actually talking to the Google APIs. So we're going to go to Android now. Android, in your app, you will use the Google Play Client Library, which we provide for you, which actually connects to the Google Play Services APK that is running on phones, Gingerbread and later. That's something that we provide that's automatically updated. And then we help you basically talk to Google's APIs through the Google Play Client Library and the Google Play Services APK. So now I'm going to show you an example of using the code. We use, in our onCreate method, we will actually create a Google API client builder. We're going to add our callbacks, and we're going to select which API we're going to use. In this case, we're going to use the Google Plus API. And then we're also going to add a scope. Here we're using the Google Plus login scope, which we'll talk more about what the scopes mean later. So we build that, and then on the start, we connect to the Google Play Services APK. And then likewise on stop, we disconnect from the Google Play Services APK. And then in your app, in your UI, you just add to your XML layout. You'll add the sign-in button where you want it to appear. And that's most of it. In iOS, we provide a iOS SDK that you can use in your app, which then helps you talk to the Google APIs. So here's an example of the code to do that. We use the GPP sign-in shared instance. You set some attributes on it. We set the client ID, which we got from the Google Developers Console earlier. We set that we want to also get the Google email address back as part of the request. And we also set the scopes. Here again, we're using the plus.login scope. And then we set the delegate to the self, and then we trigger the actual authenticate method. You'll also notice that we try the silent authentication, which Joel was talking about earlier, of being able to sign in users who have signed in previously on the web or on Android. It will automatically sign them in if they've already done so. On the web, you use the plus1.js to talk to Google APIs to make it easier. You place the plus1.js before the closing body tag, and then you put in the G+ sign-in button. Here we are setting with the data attributes. We're setting that we want the plus.login scope again. We're also using the client ID, which we got from the Google Developer Console earlier. And we're also setting a callback. In our callback, we get presented with an auth result. And in that auth result, we check to see if they have an access token. If that access token is there, then we know that the user was signed in successfully. If that isn't there, then we can check the auth result error to see what the problem was or why the sign-in failed. And now Joel will talk to us about how we can move onto the server as well.
OK, so we've talked about how to implement this in the client-side code. If you want to do asynchronous calls from your server to Google APIs, and this can be done even if the user does not have their client, the client app open. We have, so here at the top of the screen, we've kind of talked about the client-side flow, where the user, where your app has integrated Google Plus sign-in. When the user clicks on the sign-in button, there's going to be an OAuth request sent to Google servers, which then triggers the sign-in dialog that we were talking about. And then finally, once the user has accepted, there's an access token. There's an access token returned that that you can use to then make requests to the Google API calls from your Android client or your web client. If you need to make server-side calls asynchronously of whether the user actually has your app open, we have an extra thing that you can add to the flow where we get a one-time code returned to your client, which then can be sent to the server, and then on your server, you use that one-time code to communicate with Google and exchange it for a separate access token and a refresh token that your server can use to make calls on its own. And the access tokens will expire after about an hour, but the refresh token can be used to get a new access token at the time that you need it. And this is handled automatically by the server-side client libraries that Google provides for various languages for the sign-in product. Okay, so let's look at how to implement this for a web example. Here in the sign-in button, you're going to add two new lines. One is the data redirect URI, which you set to post message, and the second is the data access type, which you set to offline. And this just enables the one-time code flow that's going to allow you to send that token up to your server. In JavaScript, you're going to need to handle the sign-in callback with the auth result. And in this case, we actually want to check the auth result of code is set. And that's going to be that one-time code that I was referencing. Once you have the auth result of code, you can use that. Here we're using jQuery to send a post message up to a PHP server in this case, where we set the data parameter to that code that we got from Google. Looking at the server-side code, here we're in PHP, and we're assuming that we have that server-side PHP client library for Google Plus sign-in installed, and that's where the client variable is coming from. So here, we're going to make a call to Google servers where we take the request value that you got from your client app with the get content, which is going to be that code that you sent. And we're going to send that to the client.authenticate method, which is what actually makes the request to the Google OAuth servers to get your new access token and your new refresh token for the server. Once you get the access token back, you can decode it from the response, and there's a verification step. Now, the verification step is a bit lengthy, so we didn't want to include it on the slides. But this is a good time for me to mention that there's great documentation on developers.google.com that includes various languages. So if you're using Python or PHP or whatever language works for you, we have sample code for all of these different languages. And it's just a really great place to kind of see more detailed documentation. There's a lot more commenting in the code there, because there's obviously the room for it. And a lot of the explanations we're talking about here are also explained in the code as well as in accompanying documentation. So be sure to check that out. And then finally, the last step we're showing here is it's important to save that token, obviously, in whatever way makes sense for your app. So in this case, we're saving in the session variable, but however you plan to, I guess in whatever way it makes sense for your app to use the token later on, you want to make sure you have it around to make future calls on behalf of that user. And then finally, it's good to let your app know that this has succeeded so that your app knows it doesn't have to retry this at a later date. All right. So the next thing I want to talk to you guys about was incremental authorization. So this is the principle that you only want to ask for permissions that you absolutely need when your user first signs in, and only ask for the permissions you need when you need them. So the main benefit of this is it really reduces the friction and the barrier of entry into your app, and it keeps the user's life a lot more simple. So they see a sign-in, you only ask for a couple things. It means the user is going to be a lot more likely just to click sign in, and they're not confused by why you're asking for what you're asking for. And then at a later time, when you really need some new scope or some new ability or some new information from Google, you can ask for those scopes at that time. So as part of the Google Plus sign-in product, we provide a way for you guys to do this. So here, let's say you had gone to the 8Tracks website. So 8Tracks is a music streaming service. You choose to click sign in with Google Plus. And here the consent is fairly basic. It's asking to know your basic profile info. It's asking to make your listen activities available to Google. And it's asking to view your email address. So this is pretty standard nowadays with social sign-in. Once the user signs in, they have a chance to browse around your website, in this case, listen to music, favorite some things, take a look around. And then on the side, there's a little option here to mix in recommendations based on your YouTube watch history. And it gives the user the option to click the button to connect their YouTube account. In this case, once they click that button, they're going to be shown a new authorization screen, which only asks for the scopes that are new. So in this case, the YouTube scope, we're not re-showing them the whole list. We're not giving them a giant list to look through. And it makes sense because the user has clicked has performed an action to cause this to happen. They know that they want to connect their YouTube account, so when Google says 8tracks is asking for a YouTube account, it really makes sense. All right, so let's take a look at how we can get this implemented. We've shown you the code, the basic login flow on Android. To add a new scope after the user has been using your app for a while, you're going to need to disconnect your previous Google API client, and then you end up connecting a new Google API client with an expanded set of scopes. So whatever new scope or new piece of information that you want. This is going to fail initially because that scope has not been granted to your app yet. The user has not given permission for it. So you're going to handle the onConnectionFailed callback on Android by showing a new dialog, and this dialog will contain that new scope that I just showed you previously. On iOS, it's very similar. You're going to append the new scope to the GPP signin instance. Then you call the authenticate method, similar to the Android example, and again handle the finish with error callback by showing the dialog to the user so that they can accept the new scope. On web, it's more of a one-step process. All you need to do is request the additional scopes with the gapi.auth.signin method. OK, so Randy's going to talk to you a little bit about, now that we know how to implement the APIs, he's going to talk to you about what you can actually do with them.
So in our earlier examples, we actually used the Google Plus login scope, but I'm going to show you some of the other scopes that you can use and what they get for you. So we're going to start off with some of the profile scope. The profile scope is almost the basic login scope. It gives you the basic information about the Google user. It also gives you a me pointer, which I'll talk about later when we show an example of using it. And then we also get the ability to do over-the-air install for Android apps. Then we have the Google Plus login, which we demoed earlier, which actually includes everything that the profile does, plus it gives you the Google Plus users' age range and their language. Additionally, it gives you the list of users in the Google Plus circles who the user has specified that you can see, and also allows you to write app activities, such as 8tracks did with listening activities. And then we also have an OpenID Connect profile that you can get from the scopes. We also have an email scope, which gives you the Google's user email account, and if they are a Google Apps for Business user, it also gets you the domain name back, so you can verify that they belong to that domain. We also have a plus.profile.emails.read, which gives you everything in the email. Plus, if the user has any additional emails in their Google Plus profile that are verified, it will also return those to you. So here we're going to show some examples of using the different scopes. This is a REST example, but we also have APIs built into the web, iOS and Android, that make this a lot easier to do. So here we're doing a GET request to the Google APIs. You'll notice on the end we're doing user ID in brackets. The me pointer that I was talking about earlier makes it so that instead of putting in the actual user ID, you can use the currently authenticated user and use the me token in the place of that. So this will get you their basic profile information. This is how to get the OpenID Connect profile for the user. We also have the more social ones where you can get the people that are visible to your app, those circles that the user selected. And also there's a connected scope of it, or API that you can use to get the ones that are also connected to your app that are in their circles. So to recap, you can actually use Google Plus sign-in with any of the Google accounts. Any Google account that includes Android users, Gmail users, YouTube users, and Google Plus users. All of those users can actually sign in using Google Plus sign-in. We talk about providing a very seamless experience. The way that you do that is for asking for permissions in context. You don't want to ask for 20 permissions at the first of your app when they don't make sense to the user. You want to actually provide them the minimum at the first and then add on as they need them and as they're actually using the features that require those. Then we also have the auto sign-in on app startup. So if you've already used it on the web and you go to the Android, it's going to automatically sign you in with the same permissions. We also want you to show on your app the user's name and photo so that they can actually see what account they've signed into and it makes sense to them and reminds them of what's happened. We also allow you to do over-the-air installs for Android. from signing in on the web, which makes it very good for converting users from the web over to your mobile device. From here, you can go onto the Google Plus sign-in documentation page. Go to developers.google.com/plus. You can find examples in iOS, Android, and the web there. And we have further documentation on all the different pieces of this, as long as code examples. So thank you. And if you have any questions, I think we still have a couple of minutes.
If you guys have questions afterwards, we'll be sitting around, so feel free to come up and talk to us. Thank you.